Hi everyone, welcome to the Global Gambit. We are doing a solo live stream today. Just a brief update for me, probably 30-45 minutes, because I will be back later with another guest on the Houthis. It is quite challenging. I'm currently actually coming to you from Tunisia, so technically part of the broader MENA or Middle East and North African region, a trip I planned a few months ago, and obviously Trump being Trump, he doesn't take into account people's travel plans. So I am doing this, the podcast a little bit limitedly. I don't have my microphone on, but there is a better mic, I hope. Let me know how the sound is, but also quick CTA call to action for many of you interested. I am looking to bring on a couple more hands to help elevate the show, get more guests on to cover the events happening on a daily basis, perhaps hold 1 to 2 live streams. So if you're interested in helping to schedule guests, suggest names, reach out and be part of the process even more, then do drop me a message. You can find me on LinkedIn, on X, and you can also email me if you like. But yeah, open call there for anyone interested, no pressure. And yeah, I mean, if you enjoy it, we can talk about longer term setting up and stuff, but given the intensity of things and trying to do it all largely single-handedly, I thought I'd just mention that. But still, we are now on day 30. This is literally a month now, officially a month of a war between 3 major players, or what some people would say was what we thought was 1 major player and 2 others that are. But the point being is that Iran is not perhaps in the same position it was a couple of years ago. And this idea that the Iranian machine, the Iranian system, the IRGC, the Islamic Republic was impenetrable, incapable of being, not incapable of being defeated, but basically much more of a potent force than perhaps it has proven to be. But then other people will emphasize, well, we're still in this war and Iran is winning. What I like to do on the channel is obviously try to listen to different perspectives. And over the past month, we've hosted quite a few, we've participated in a few. And to me, it's always in times like this, things become very binary. It's either one side is winning and the other side is losing, or vice versa. And what I like to try and do on the show is remind us that it isn't like that. Of course, you can argue that the Iranians aren't winning because they haven't beaten the US military, but you can't say that the US military is winning either because they haven't achieved their strategic objectives. And part of the problem is because we don't really know what those are. What are the military objectives? That still remains the main question here. And in the live stream I'll get into in a few hours from now at around 10 p.m. my time, so 4 hours from now, I'll be speaking to a colleague from Johns Hopkins about the Houthis, because the entry of the Houthis is, other than the death or assassination of Khamenei and the continued siege situation around the Strait of Hormuz, that is one of the most significant developments, the biggest shifts, I think, in what has we've become largely accustomed to sporadic missile exchanges and drone warfare. Certainly also what's happening in the front on Lebanon is something that I want to cover more as well. But the point is that a lot of things have changed in the past month, and a lot of the presumptions that we had about the balance of power, about the way that the Middle East works, who are the top rivals for the regional leadership, or whatever, being the regional hegemon, it has changed a lot. And there's quite a few things. I mean, got so many different thoughts happening in my head right now. But yeah, I just wanted to maybe focus initially on reflecting on the past 30 days and just what is happening here. In the time we've seen, as I said, the assassination, we've seen the Strait of Hormuz absolutely illustrated as a choke point. But I think that that's a critical point, which is that the Iranians are very good at leveraging their comparative advantage, which is near abroad or their immediate area, and putting a lot of pressure. They can't go to toe with the US military, so they will put pressure where they know it hurts the most, and hopefully feeds back into the political pressure to discontinue the military, the kinetic warfare. Clausewitz said, war is but politics by war. Politics is war by other means, or whatever. Whichever way it goes around, I can't remember. Point being is that they are leveraging what they can, and in a very effective way. And people on the American-Israeli side will emphasize that this is a very deliberate, systematic set of steps being taken to disarm, dismember effectively various components of the Islamic Republic, and to a large extent, they have achieved some remarkable goals. The military output, if you like, or the amount of missiles being shot has plummeted to what I think even only a handful a day, or half a dozen a day, depending upon where you're talking about in targets. But the reality is that the Islamic Republic has been preparing for this scenario for decades. It's day zero for them, and it's all about the existential risk. It's all about survival, and the amount of confliction that exists within the US government, or the different perceptions of what is happening or how things are going, is one of the biggest Achilles heel for the US. If it was a united front, then there would be no problem. But because the IRGC is one of the most potent forces leading it, and at least the regime, the government is largely in what's the word? Unistep? What's the word? In lockstep. They are there aren't as many frictions to worry about. For the Americans, when you have the Pentagon saying that they think they've only eradicated a third of the missile stockpiles, production facilities, launches, etc., that demonstrates that the Iranians have either moved things underground or have always had way more than we anticipated, estimated, etc. So the Iranians have the capacity to last a lot longer than I think anyone is really given credit for, and so that leads us to considerations of putting boots on the ground. Firstly, in the idea of supporting the Kurds, and that is some kind of rally round the flag, or galvanizing the Iranian people to topple their government, as a ground-led revolution, insurgency movement, effectively. And once that demonstrated to have very little appetite, Trump begins looking more, okay, we're not going to use militia groups in the northwest to try to pressure the government. We will put more assets in the Strait of Hormuz. We're going to put Strait of Hormuz, and we're going to bring our allies and partners. Even though our allies and partners, and this is one of the key things for me, is I'm a systems person. I look at the big picture and systems and things like NATO, and Trump hasn't notified his NATO allies and partners, let alone insulting them. He's not even notified them. So then he gets incredibly angry and resentful, lashing out when he says, well, NATO was never good for us, and all the comments that he said. I know many of you have your sentiments about Trump, and whilst I've always tried to give a little bit of a benefit of the doubt, call me naive, ignorant, whatever, I have firmly come to the conclusion of how I feel about this guy after the past couple of days, but also just remembering some other things. I've just had I was sitting on the plane out here to Tunisia, and I just was reflecting on what he said and how he's been in the past few weeks. And I don't know why I ever try to sort of this idea that maybe it's all part of a grand strategic plan and his anchoring and sort of stuff. We try to rationalize what he's doing. We try to add layers of maybe cognizant depth when there just isn't. And I'll come to why in a minute. If some of you watched the video I posted earlier, I kind of alluded to it then. But I will unpack it a little bit in a moment. But simply, so Trump tries to galvanize a collective force, maritime force, to force the Strait of Hormuz to be open. That doesn't work. So we're now at the stage where ground forces, I am being deliberately vague in that regard because I have no idea what that constitutes, are being deployed in large numbers to the Middle East. The main headline I've seen today that I was digesting is that the Iranians, and that's why I've titled this, the Iran awaiting US ground invasion, because Iran says we're ready. There's been a lot of reports about the amount of people Iran is trying to galvanize, and I think they are having a problem with that as well, because whilst a lot of people don't like the government, they're also very concerned with the extent of damage and fallout that the US-Israeli coalition has caused. I think a lot of Iranians, when they called for US support, expected quite this level. So there's that. And now that there is the prospect of a genuine ground incursion, if you like, assault, I think there's a lot of concern about how far this is going to ransack the country, create even more havoc. And let's pretend it's a limited ground operation. So one scenario is that it's special forces, it's Marines, it's these kinds of groups who are focused on specific facilities, right? Karg Island, much of you guys have probably read about that. And I think that would be a hotspot, but that doesn't solve the issue because Iran has plenty of other oil production facilities, processing plants that it can leverage. So some people have said maybe the US should undertake a multi-prong operation to basically seize and occupy a bunch of these islands that exist within the Strait of Hormuz or up through the Strait of Hormuz. And that way, then that would be a preemptive sort of move that would prevent the Iranians from being able to replace Karg Island. But that requires upwards of 10,000 forces. And I think the most critical element of all of this is that they're right within Iran's backyard. And if Iran has as many rockets, projectiles, whatever we want to use, drones, that's incredibly easy for them to target. They're right next door to them. So I personally, I mean, it's sort of for those of you who know me from the Russian content, you know, we talk about the meat grinder. I don't really like the analogy, but it is. Trump would effectively be potentially risking US personnel, putting them into the lion's den, the meat grinder, because they're within an easy targeting distance. The proximity to Iran is insane. But also theoretically, the groups in Iraq, the ones loyal to Iran, the militia groups up there could target them, and the Houthis. The Houthis do have missiles capable of reaching that far across Saudi Arabia. We don't know what Saudi Arabia would do, whether they'd shoot them down. There's a lot of speculation here. I'm just spitballing scenarios. But the point is that if such a limited ground operation were to occur, that's sort of what comes to mind. It feels absolutely insane to imagine the maximalist scenario of all-out conflict or all-out ground invasion on Iran mainland, Iran proper. It can certainly happen, but as up until now, this Iran war, this Gulf war has been aerial campaign led with aspects of the maritime theater. But a lot of people relate it to the Iraq-Iran war of the 80s. But of course, that's very different because that was a full-scale land invasion. The Gulf War itself in 91 was still a multi-faceted conflict with a lot of ground elements. So Trump single-handedly trying to undertake a war effort against Iran, you need upwards of 500,000 troops, I think, to have any reasonable ground. And that was a multinational force in the case of Iraq or Iraq 2003 or Afghanistan. And I don't think there's any appetite for anyone to get involved. And this whole idea that what I do keep hearing on Twitter and other places is that the Gulf states are changing. They're reading the tea leaves and they're going to get involved. I mean, they might get involved in a slightly more offensive posture in an aerial sense, or Saudi Arabia, and this is why I think it becomes very complicated. Saudi Arabia might specifically start targeting the Houthis because of what they did in January. There was a large-scale operation between the Saudis, which caused a huge rift between the Emiratis and the Saudis over Yemen. So my point being is that the Saudis have a specific interest over the Houthis and that area. But whether or not they would sort of support some kind of all-out of war ground offensive into Iran, I find way beyond plausible. But these are the things being discussed right now. Trump is still pushing the idea of $200 billion and the build-up, supposed build-up. I know some of you probably speculate on that. I'm not pretending to have particularly secret information. I don't really know what to say about that. When I made a video a few weeks ago, before this took off, I sort of postulated around a few different scenarios that the war could, scenarios that could develop. Obviously, you always think about the maximalist one, the minimalist being that we get a deal, everything's fine. Iran suddenly wants to work, idealistically, the Iranians come around and they denuclearize, they disarm, etc., etc. That was obviously not going to happen. But I also completely rejected the idea of a large-scale military offensive. I thought it would be more refined, more targeted on military assets, on perhaps things in the line of the war. I did not expect them to target the entire leadership and for it to develop into what it has become, which is a full-scale regional conflict. But I also am still severely skeptical, but terrified of the idea of a full-scale ground offensive, which I mean, we don't know. We can't cut it out with this guy in power. But this leads me to the sort of the bit that I wanted to get to, which is the Houthis are seemingly now involved. I add those caveats because, as always, there are varying degrees by which you can get involved. You've heard me say it enough times: defensively, offensively, limited operations. And the Houthis could still do that. So the Houthis could be involved, but they focus entirely just on targeting Israel. Now you might think, well, that's pretty severe, but it's a significant calculation on the Houthis' case, because they don't want to draw the ear of the US. So they focus largely on Israel. They keep it to a subsection of the war, if you like. And so it's Israel's problems. Of course, the United States might choose anyway to get involved or help defend Israel or supply more to Israel to ensure they can intercept missiles, projectiles, etc. from the Houthis. But this is, of course, a problem for the Americans because it means that they deplete more of their stockpiles. And definitely with the kinds of munitions arsenal that the Houthis have, this isn't just, these aren't just casual militias. These are a pretty well organized group and some of the most ideologically driven of any of the Middle Eastern entities I'm aware of. I'm not an expert on them per se, but from my time of studying the Yemen civil war, I've come to appreciate just how radical they are in certain ways, or the lengths they're willing to go to fight their corner, so to speak. But they have a very significant arsenal, a lot of it obviously funded by Iran and other entities perhaps, but that will require interceptors. You can't just take them out with sort of, it's going to put a lot of pressure on the Iron Dome potentially, and it's going to be a big headache for Tel Aviv and Washington. But that doesn't necessarily mean that the Houthis end there. The alternative is that they decide to go a bit further. They decide to genuinely become to cause maritime disruptions. So in the broader Gulf of Aden, which is sort of part of the Greater Horn of Africa, they decide that they want to blockade. They decide that they want to target tankers, whatever, American specific ships or ships related to Israel, Israeli registered, whatever within that line of thinking. So they decide to blockade. Now, through this area, obviously, it goes up to the Suez Canal. So it's not 20% of oil that transfers, it's 15% of all trade goes through that area. So we now have a multi-layered or a two-pronged choke point, two choke points effectively. cutting off collectively 35% of overall maritime, whatever, be it oil, energy, goods, everything. It's collectively, the snowball effect is clear to see. So the Houthis can do that, and that would require the United States, as really the only significant navy in the area, to be distracted. It dilutes their ability, because right now, at least from my understanding, the primary carrier strike group is around, of course, the Strait and trying to pressure that or keep that area managed. I believe there is another one in and around the Eastern Med. I'm not a OSINT guy, so I don't have a exact up-to-date knowledge of where each asset is. If you know, then drop it in the chat. But this will force the US government to have to diversify assets, and that means Iran is emboldened or feels that it's working, and Israel is under intensified pressure. There is another potential possibility. There is another possibility, which is that this could be the trigger point that causes more of the Europeans to get involved. If you're not aware, the British have been leading what they call a demining coalition, with the theoretical intention of helping to manage the safe passage of vessels through the Strait of Hormuz. However, there has been growing discussion, from what I understand, in London, in Paris, Berlin, and so on, to help with protecting just against disruption to maritime flows. And I think that if the Houthis begin to target this area as well, the Banaman Gap, whatever, Bendanam Gap, I also get the name, that would be that could be the trigger, because there's enough of an argument in international law, or enough Western countries in Europe could argue that it's legitimate, that they're not getting involved with Trump's war against Iran. They are just defending maritime corridors and things like that. I think that is a reasonable, you could see the British government coming out with a statement. I don't know, you guys might watch The Diplomat or some of those series on Netflix where they're producing a statement, and they have to work intricately on the wording and stuff. You could see, I think, them working on that, trying to be like, well, this is, if we frame it correctly, it gives us a right to say that we're not attacking Iran, but we are defending our interests and the security of the global economy, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Again, very speculative, no idea if that is feasible. But there is actually another layer, another escalatory layer, I think, possible here. And that's the crux of the video that I posted earlier, which it is pretty far-fetched, I won't lie, but you can't count it out. You just can't, with the rate at which things are changing, which is that the Gulf of Aden is obviously where the Somalian pirates were very active in the 2010s, early 2010s, 2010, 2011. And the US led, eventually, a multinational anti-piracy force that proved incredibly effective. Now, this piracy was predominantly around the coast of Somalia, but they were enough of a problem that the international community, for what it's worth, I mean, also the world was a lot more united back then, but for what it's worth, came together to denounce and resolve it, or attempt to properly, and it largely did. But out of this, the growth of Al-Shabaab, which is a extreme group, a terrorist group, they've been in Somalia for a long time, but a report that I remember reading late last year, I think it came out around November, was basically that the two groups, the Houthis in Yemen and the Al-Shabaab in Somalia, have been working incredibly much more than was assumed or aware of. Basically, that they have been smuggling a significant amount of weaponries. There's been a lot of intelligence. Now, the Houthis are a lot better armed and a lot more organized as a group, because they govern effectively half of Yemen. whilst Al-Shabaab it has pockets of Somalia that it controls, but it is more of an ideological movement, whilst well, that was good. We got disconnected. Sorry about that, everyone. African Wi-Fi for what it's worth. Okay, so what I was explaining was simply the Greater Horn of Africa. So the Greater Horn of Africa, it's a strategic and climate vulnerable area encompassing all the way from Eritrea, Djibouti, Kenya, Somalia, Sudan, Uganda. But the common point here is that there's a large Islamic extremist or Islamic jihadist area, and the Houthis have been working very intentionally to build not just casual sort of engagements, but and a system, a sustained a network between different groups. So let me just see if I can bring this up here, or am I going to cost the connection again? This is the problem when you try to travel and also run a geopolitical podcast. Anyway, so this is the Greater Horn here. So we can see Ethiopia takes up a large proportion of it, but the Gulf of Aden, no, hang on. Yeah, you can see I'm good at this, right? Yeah, we will. I promise I'll hire someone and it'll be more polished, guys. So the Gulf of Aden is this area. So the Houthis largely occupy northern Yemen up here, but then this entire area around Puntland and just north of Mogadishu, which is the capital, this is all stronghold for extremist groups, and the amount of cooperation between the two, Al-Shabaab and Yemen's Houthis, has been growing significantly. So bottom line of all this, with the very drawn out point, because I got disconnected, is simply that theoretically, if the Houthis were really being hit hard by the Americans, the Israelis, they could potentially ask the Al-Shabaab and other groups to be part of a broader maritime disruptive group. So I think that is, again, a pretty extreme scenario, but possible. And one wonders just how far. It depends heavily on the extent to which the Houthis want to get involved, because to me, I think that they're going to be testing the waters for the time being. There's a lot of speculation on what their intentions are, and I think it's important to know that the Houthis have always been a little bit different than the rest of Iran's proxy networks. So while Hezbollah is obviously the flagship, as they call it, Hamas was heavily refined, if you like, or molded. The Houthis have always been slightly independent and quite happy to exercise that. They've always been quite happy to emphasize their unwillingness to defy, their willingness to defy orders from Tehran. But one piece I was reading earlier that was quite interesting is that, as you know, if you've watched some of the other conversations we've been having on the channel, if you've seen some of the interviews we've had, the death of Khamenei has made the country far more pragmatic. So Khamenei, because he was quite ideological, he kept the IGC in check. He didn't want the IGC as a system, as a machine, to get too powerful. The IGC controls so many businesses, it controls much of the money, controls much of the broader economy. A lot of the wealthiest people are within the IGC are because they have much sway. It's sort of like a version of the oligarchs in Russia, if you like. They keep the system going. And over time, as the country has had to adapt and modernize, especially under Western sanctions and isolation, is the IGC has become more and more powerful. And Khamenei, with his ideological theocratic governance, actually kept them in check because he didn't want them to become all powerful. And so if this leads to a scenario where whenever this war winds down, or at least has a moment of respite, you will have a much more militarized security / kind of police state in Iran. And that is something that the Houthis, from my, again, limited study of them, would like quite a lot. They're less ideological than a couple of the other groups. No, they are pretty ideological. I guess they're more systematic. There's a reason why they've kept distances with the theocratic part of the Iranian government, put it that way. Now, some of you also just wanted to get through a couple of other comments here. The Russian and the Chinese. So obviously, there's an incredible amount of debate as to what is the extent to which the Russians and the Chinese are involved in this. I think it's pretty clear the Russians are involved. I don't think Putin is directly supplying Iran, but they are doing pretty low lifting. They're not heavy lifting with sort of arms and munitions and things. They are sending intelligence, which is pretty cheap to do. It benefits them anyway, because they maintain a sense of observation, monitoring what the hell's going on. And it benefits the Iranians incredibly. As to whether or not it means it's had any benefit, it's led to any specific impacts in terms of what they've struck or how they've done it, I haven't read enough into it. But the Chinese is more where I wanted to focus, because I've been in different discussion groups. I've been in different spaces on Twitter. I participate sometimes, and it's quite frustrating to hear people talking about the Sino-Iranian relationship, especially. People have a rather simplistic understanding of how China works, and I'm not pretending to be an expert on Sino-centric or Chinese-specific issues, but China does not operate the same way as the Russians, the Iranians, the North Koreans do. None of them really do 100%, but China is always very different to the rest of that bunch. One academic, some people have called it, the axis of upheaval. Some people have called it the anti-Western axis, the autocratic alliance, whatever term you want to give it. Bottom line is that China does not work in the same way. There are different theories about what China wants in the world. Does it want to replace the United States as the global power? Does it want to be the new hegemon? Does it simply want to be a regional leader or have complete control and dictate terms over broader Indo-Pacific or the broader Asia theater, Asia-Pacific, or however you want to interpret that region? Or does it just benefit from things as they are, what people call a status quo power? Now, in my opinion, I think China has a mixture of them. I think China doesn't want to rock the boat too much. I think that they benefit from the system, obviously, but at the same time, they are etching away at the power. They are trying to make the international financial system more beneficial to them. They're trying to encourage more countries to join their sort of versions of, I don't know, the G7, obviously BRICS or Shanghai Cooperation, all that sort of stuff. But there's limitations with that because they haven't taken certain basic economic steps to enable them to do that. So a lot of people like to point towards the dollar and the reserve currency, and it should be noted that more countries are trading less in dollars, especially bilaterally. The Russians do more in the ruble and the renminbi. But when it comes to across the system, a lot of countries have still been hesitant to adopt China's version of the SWIFT payment system, what's known as CLIPS or something like that, CLIPS. I think that's the acronym. And that's because there's a certain uncomfortableness people have. There's some distrust certain countries still have about China. That's why we see very few countries entering into actual defense pacts or joint declarations like proper alliances. I think China has 3 or 4, but they don't have comprehensive agreements like the United States has with the UK or NATO, obviously, overall. But also the economics. China is unwilling to open its capital accounts. You can't trade in renminbi in the same way you can with the dollar. So that limits China's ability to overreach in this. And so the bottom line, I'm sharing all this information, is that people just assume that because China has this sort of anti-Western sentiment, it's the same as Russia's vis-a-vis how they're acting over Iran war. I don't think so at all. I'm very skeptical that the Chinese are involved in this in any way. Okay, they might provide them with information, but I mean, the difference that makes vis-a-vis what the Russians are providing intelligence. Personally, I think the Russians have a better intelligence understanding of the Middle East than the Chinese do, because they've been active there since the Syrian civil war, and their border with the Caucasus, and obviously Iran as of all the countries that we think of this in this pact, in this grouping. I think Iran and Russia are the closest overall in terms of their ideological willingness to go further in disrupting Western interests or interfere or whatever you want to say it like that, and support one another beyond just financial means or with worded statements. So it's not entirely clear to me the extent to which the Chinese are involved. I've got a video coming out hopefully tomorrow on this. And on the one hand, China is, as I said, pretty pretty welcoming of this, because it means that they can ensure that they're seen as a more responsible power. They can, the optics, the signaling, all that sort of the diplomatic dances. But on the other hand, obviously, this is a huge crisis for their economy. Of any country that has got stockpiles of oil reserves and things that they've built up, China has significant, but only around 4 to 5 months. So China is not ready is not immune from the longer fallout of this conflict. If this conflict is going to go on for weeks, as Rubio said yesterday, if I remember correctly, even China is going to be really up against it. And I personally think that the Chinese are more in a more precarious position than they would like to admit. But certainly they're benefiting from this in terms of the optics and how they can leverage it for their interests in broader Asia. If America is going to be putting more and more assets back into the Middle East, which is also why, to come back to my point earlier about how stupid Trump is, Trump has emphasized this whole idea of pivot to Asia. We're going to forget the Middle East. There's nothing here for us. I think he said this 6 months ago, after the 12-day war. It's like, we're done with the Middle East. There's nothing else there for us. We're going to be focusing on Asia. Our intentions, our issues, our risks are in Asia. And now they are in an absolute quagmire in the Middle East. Even it makes sort of the airstrikes in Libya and things that the Obama administration look relatively sort of simple. Not that I endorse them, by the way. But I have no idea what Trump's doing. He said he wanted to take not the war, but he wanted to take the challenge to China. And he's now literally withdrawing assets, not big ones, it's not significant, but there's enough that people in China, in parts of Asia, Japan, South Korea, that I've chatted to, have told me that China's noting that America's pulling out certain things to reposition them, put them in the Middle East. That just emboldens China to continue putting up the pressure on Taiwan. And there was a very interesting article in the Financial Times yesterday about a group, a task force, if you like, of Congress people who were going over to Taiwan to try to encourage the Taiwanese government to pass a defensive bill, which is only growing in urgency because of this reallocation of resources and energy and time by the Trump administration. So you've got there, for those of you in the States, another illustration of just how much Congress is working against the executive, but also being completely paralyzed because Trump has just gone to war without consulting them. So, I forgot it. Whilst I'm remembering about Trump, the final reason I think that he is completely he is making up on the fly. As I say, I like to try and hold out. I like to believe that maybe there's something else there. The reason I think that they are making it up is because if Trump is going to start, it's insanity to believe that striking the situation in Yemen is going to lead to an okay situation with the Houthis, because he's opening up another front which completely undoes any ability for him to say that he's got control of this situation. You wouldn't do that unless you had a bigger plan in mind, but he doesn't, because he wouldn't be doing this, because he realizes what this means, that the Houthis put double pressure on the economy and sends the global economy into a situation worse than the 1970s. I was speaking to Martin Wolf of the Financial Times last week in an interview that I'm hoping to air soon. It was in person, so it requires a bit more editing. And I mean, he surprised me actually by saying, well, he said something that surprised me. I'm going to leave a juicy cliffhanger there. You can tune in for that one. But point is that this is the situation with the economy is only going to get so much worse with the Houthis going to get involved. And I think at that point, even the Chinese will respond to that in one way or another, because whilst they have oil that's affected by the Strait of Hormuz, so much of their goods, like everybody's, comes through the through the Gulf of Aden. And if that happens, then ship liners, whatever, tankers, and they're all going to have freighters. They're all going to have to go around the Cape of the Cape of Good Hope. They're going to have to go around the whole of Africa to resolve this. And what this is going to do to insurance premiums, to the cost of living crisis that so many of us have been struggling with as well. And that was the other thing that I think is worth noting, is the heightened economic impact this is doing. So if you think about COVID or you think about Ukraine, after both those moments, the baseline pricing for goods, for services, whatever, was very high, but it never really went back down in certain areas. Oil, certain raw commodities, it was different. We saw a high of, I think it was $150 per barrel when Putin invaded Ukraine, and we haven't reached that level yet. But the baseline costs of certain goods associated with that, because obviously companies pass it down to the consumer over time, they've never really gone back down. So price levels pre-2022 or pre-2020 have never really returned to those levels. And so we're in one of these systemic moments now where the economic fallout from this, even if the war ends, and even if, the stagflation lasts, the overall how we feel about it day to day, how far our money goes, is going to remain. It's almost a permanent fixture. So, for whatever reason, Trump thinks that this is a good idea to sort of humor the idea of troops on the ground is beyond me. But I also wanted to touch on one other thing, which is Lebanon. Now, the situation in Iran is one thing, but the country is sort of it's sizable enough, and the government at least have sort of been in they've got a certain mindset, hardened enough that it's. But Lebanon has been through so much already. The Iranians have been relatively sheltered up until this point. They've had their 12-day war, and we've had skirmishes occasionally, but they haven't had anyway in the level of full-on conflict as Lebanon has. And Lebanon, for its humanitarian crisis, with the massive explosion that rocked the economy in 2020, if you remember, in the port, there was that massive explosion, which caused havoc for inflation and the country's economy. Then, of course, COVID on top of that. And of course, since October 7th and Hezbollah and the whole situation there. So the hardest thing for me is thinking about the implications this is having on Lebanon. From my understanding, I haven't paid too much attention to it. Israel has effectively occupied parts of southern Lebanon, and it seems to me that they are not going to leave that area, that buffer. They're creating like an effective buffer zone until the Lebanese government guarantees the disarmament of the Houthis, of Hezbollah. But considering how ineffective, how unable the Lebanese government has been able to do so, that seems like an impossible ask. So Lebanon again becomes, if anything, the biggest flashpoint, the biggest area of destruction and loss of this, more than Iran. Even Iran will be able to maybe rebuild itself, but Lebanon is approaching the category of a completely failed state. And given its history and the culture and just the people and just what the country's been through for so long, it's tragic to think about that. Just also wanted to touch on a couple of other date updates here, because I think it's worth interesting. So just seeing here now, so the US has CENTCOM, which is the central command within the Middle East, has said around 3,500 additional soldiers in the Middle East are on the USS Tripoli. I've always been unsure about whether that's a great name to use, to be honest with you, Tripoli. The Post is the one that I was thinking of. The Washington Post has reported that the Pentagon is preparing for weeks of ground operations. It would fall short of a full-scale invasion. So there you go. And would involve raids by special forces and what they called conventional infantry troops. Now, I know many of you, myself included, are skeptical of that. What's also worth noting is just how much of this has been protested against by the American public. The last poll I saw, which I think was yesterday, said that even MAGA Republicans now, who have proven to be incredibly loyal, even in this regard, are shifting. So I think it was more than 55% of MAGA supporters supported the idea of a ground operation, as long as it was limited in scope. But even now, I saw that was less than 50%. But there are obviously more options around. I think it was like 48% of those who supported the Trump administration said that they supported some kind of ground operation. But then it was also split between what kind of operation, no operation. So it seems to be the majority still, or the biggest proportion is still in favor of some ground operation, but it's lessening. And that's without then going into, obviously, the average independents, Democrats, who are well above 70%, I think, for Democrats and 60% for independents. And there is no appetite for this, and the lack of coherency, the lack of coordination, the lack of unity within the American government is one of the biggest, I think, Achilles heels. I said this at the beginning of the stream. It's one of the biggest issues for the coalition side, if you want, the coalition versus, well, I guess the Iranians are a coalition if the Houthis are part of it now, the two coalitions. And then that's without even getting into the Israeli-American divergences here. I think many of you know that I'm very critical of Israeli foreign policy. People don't like that because it makes me think that I sort of I'm pro-Iranian, which is obviously bizarre and goes back to the binary point I started this whole thing off with, which is that you either are all on one side or you're all on another. You can't be selectively supportive, apparently. I disagree with that. I am absolutely against the Iranian government and its treatment of the Iranian people. But I also don't think that this war, based on its current method and objectives, is going to obtain the desired goals. I don't think it's going to come out better, and I don't think it's worth the economic costs. That's what I would say. I mean, it's a pretty reasonable position, I personally think. The very last thing I wanted to touch on now is simply also talks. So obviously we can argue that this is all smoke and mirrors. Trump has this idea of wanting to negotiate whilst pressuring. I've talked about the idea of anchoring before, but I do think he just doesn't know what he's doing, because he's decided to trigger the Houthis to get involved, which then means his forces are going to be divided, and the whole thing is just a complete chaos. So I don't think he's got any plan at all. And so this idea of talks and escalation, I think, is nonsense. Clearly, the Americans are a bit over their head, and maybe it's just Trump who is like, so his ego is so much that he's like, I can't back down now. He's like Putin. He can't let go. He has to send troops in to try and force some kind of effective win. But diplomatically speaking, what I think is very interesting is the countries trying to position themselves as interlocutors, as mediators. The Pakistanis have really come into this very strongly, and they're putting a lot of risk on this, because if this doesn't go well, if the talks fail, which I don't think they're even going on, that could backfire badly for Pakistan. But Trump said some recent comments, I think in the past 24 hours, basically hailing the leader of the military junta that leads Pakistan, and was it's rejuvenated the relationship, because the relationship between Trump and Pakistan was not great. So I think it's very interesting to see how they are attempting to leverage their regional position. They've done this quite often in the past, positioning themselves as a mediator, or offering themselves as one. And sometimes it's been effective, sometimes it hasn't. Obviously, Pakistan has its own interests with the economy, but also the relationship with Iran. Those two have had border issues over Balochistan, which is this small region territory where a separatist groups seek self-determination territory, like the Kurds in the northwest of Iran. And there's a common interest amongst Iran or the Iranians and the Pakistanis to clamp down on that. They do not want any separatist movements occurring. But then there are other two major players here. Turkey has been, as always, a slightly different player in the Middle East, because it's part of NATO. It has one of the most potent, if not most potent, military force in the Middle East. Erdogan has not shared any qualms about how he feels about the war between Israel and Hamas. And but there's always been a bit of a, up until I'd say a few years ago, Orban, not Orban, Erdogan, the leader of Turkey, had been pursuing a policy of neo-Ottomanism, this idea of trying to rekindle sort of the Ottoman Empire with Turkey as the center hub. And a lot of countries, the regional players, were quite keen to distance themselves from that, or sort of emphasize that Turkey was not as involved as it wanted to claim it was. But they always have a tendency to offer themselves as a mediator. They've done this with obviously the Ukraine war, but it's interesting to see how they're playing this off against the Pakistanis. The Turks are going to Pakistan, I think, in the next day or so. They're going to be meeting, along with the last actor I wanted to mention, which is Egypt. Now, if the situation with the Houthis escalates and they decide to blockade the Gulf of Aden, that's obviously a huge problem for Cairo, for the Egyptians, because the Egyptians earn a lot of money from the Suez Canal. And that's what the Iranians want to do. They want to offer a toll, which some reading I've read, sort of, some people were like, well, that's not such an extreme idea. I'm not, opinions out on that, jury's out on that one, but I think that the Egyptians will suddenly have to be a lot more active in this than they want to be if the Houthis get involved. And that will be complicated because then you've got the Saudis involved. So this is the point. Bring it all back round to the Houthis and sort of the latest developments today. If they decide to get involved, that means you've got the Saudis much more having to be involved because of the relationship they've had with trying to go at the Houthis. But also then the Egyptians, because of the risks to the Red Sea and the Suez Canal and the economic commerce and dependency of the Egyptian economy on that toll. So I know it wouldn't just be a toll. I guess that's a fair point. But yeah, I'm very worried with how far, because if Egypt gets pulled in, then it easily spills into the Greater Horn, as I was describing earlier. So to me, this goes from being, I mean, some people were saying it's relatively contained to the Gulf. I personally wouldn't frame it like that. I think that it isn't contained. I just think it's largely located. And we're back. And we're back, sort of. No, I'm on hotel Wi-Fi. What I'm probably going to do is just pay. I'm just going to pay for 4G, whatever, mobile data, and just stream it off that. Sorry about the quality, guys. I thought that the hotel would be better than this. It's not very good. I'll try to improve the situation for tomorrow. But yeah, what I was simply saying is that some people will argue that this is a relatively localized conflict because it's around the Strait of Hormuz and the Gulf states. But if the Houthis are more involved, then this is categorically a region-wide conflict. And It brings in countries as far as Egypt and the Horn, all the way to Pakistan, effectively. The entirety of the greater Middle East, or West Asia, as some people call it, is involved. And they're big players. Egypt is some people consider it a regional leader. Saudi Arabia obviously wants that regional leadership. Iran is the centerpiece. Israel wanting that regional leadership. Turkey to an extent. And you just don't know. I mean, if the Kurds were to get involved as well, let's end the stream by completely just bringing in everybody. If the Kurds get involved, then Turkey gets involved. So you have Northern Front with the Turks and the Kurds, Syria doing something, Israel in Lebanon, the Houthis targeting Israel, the Egyptians trying to deal with the Houthis, the Saudis trying to deal with the Houthis and possibly the Iranians, the UAE defending themselves, possibly dealing with the Iranians, the Qataris, I don't know what they're doing, and little old Oman in the corner there trying to be a mediator, but being shouted down and crowded out, and of course the United States. So this could work in any one direction. Western Asia is what non-Western people call Middle East. As some of you may know, I've spoken to a lot of Indian voices before, and people from Southern Asia or the sub-Indian continent prefer to call India Middle East Western Asia because it's a Anglo-Saxon term, and so they call it Western Asia. But the Turkey, I'm just gonna let me read through some of your comments, guys. I don't really have a specific endpoint with this stream. I'm just sort of spitballing here. As I say, I will try to find a better situation, or just buy some data and stream off my phone. But appreciate you all being here as well. Thanks for the company. If any of you have ever been to Tunisia, then let me know where I should go. But we planned this trip. That red band is the hotel. Like if you're on full board or whatever it is, half board or whatever. But yeah, never been here before. But Trump likes to keep the press busy. I guess that's fair. Anglo-Saxon, let's be civilized and speak English. Very much. No, I think what I want to do is just, I do wonder what this means for the situation with energy. The overall understanding I have is that some countries are seeking to deepen their reliance on the United States, and therefore some people argue that this was part of an ulterior, deeper seated strategy by the Trump administration to remove dependency on the Middle East or Russia and force Europe especially to be fully dependent on the US. Some people talk about Nord Stream 2 being an inside job because by destroying it, it means that America has monopolization over energy in Europe, but that varies quite a lot. So I'm not sure, but tattered shirt. Yeah, it's a bit tight. I guess I'll get a different shirt, guys. Come on, guys. You're supposed to be focusing on what I'm talking about, not what I'm wearing. Love streams. I'm going to do streams more often. Actually, I'll end it there, actually, guys, in a couple minutes. But what I would just say a couple things. So I've never really been a streamer because I'm not the most natural ad lib. Some people can just talk for days. And I don't prepare enough in advance because I'm often busy editing another video or outreaching. And that's why I started my video by saying, if any of you are interested in helping with the show, or keen to bring on a couple of extra hands, then do get in touch. But yeah, I do a lot of this myself. So trying to stream every day is tricky because you should do some prep work before, you should read up, you should have an itinerary, you should have a structure, a schedule, whatever, a list of things, an agenda that you want to get through. And I sometimes just jump on, and it's quite spontaneous. Some of you maybe love that. But I literally haven't even had a glass of water in an hour. So my mouth is also like really dry. But yeah, I want to do more live streams. and I want to do more live streams with some guests. And it's great to bring on varied guests, but sometimes, as you can see, the guest that I was meant to be hosting at 6, they had to reschedule, but I didn't want to cancel this stream. So I was just like, screw it. I'll have a solo stream and I'll just spitball. So it was a bit of a mixture of things there, but yeah, I think that going forward, I might be trying to live stream at least once a day, ideally with a guest. And if not, then I might just do this. I might just have an update, talk through some of the main things that I've been thinking about, reading about. And if we do have a couple of guests, my ideal goal would be to have a couple guests every day, not permanently. This is more whilst the war continues. But what I will probably try to do is at least 2 or 3 times a week, every Monday, say Thursday, do at least 2 streams and maybe a third one on Sunday. And a mixture of those can be guests as well as solo ones. I enjoy speaking with people more than just speaking to the screen. And I prefer being prepared in a sort of pre-recorded video, as you probably can tell. But yeah, that's sort of the intention. So I'm thinking a stream every Monday, Thursday, and then a couple of other ones as and when. But also because I have the other channels, as you know, I have the Clips channel and the podcast channel itself. This is the main one, but I want to try to increasingly diversify the interviews onto the podcast channel itself, because I think it works better for the YouTube algorithm. It works better for you guys to understand how things are classified. I've been going through a bit of a sort of back-end adjustment in the past couple of weeks, as well as along with the war. And it's all just kind of nuts. But yeah, what I think will happen next, basically, is that depending upon how the Trump administration behaves, I think will determine whether the Houthis get more involved. Because I don't think they really want to do more. I think they might launch occasional rockets at Israel. But then the other argument is that Iran has activated them very intentionally now, 1 month in, as a way to introduce another pressure point and really deepen that pressure on the American government and give them multiple fronts to be worried about, especially in the context of Israel. So I think it's I think it's at least he's not Tusi. I actually reached out to Tusi. I think he's an interesting make shorts. Yeah, that's the other thing I need to do. I have shorts. This is the point. I have so many different things that I'm trying to do all the time. But yeah, let me see. Yeah, do click the like button, folks. I'm not very polished. There's a lot of obviously more polished people on the internet. Huge kudos to sister channels out there that I work with. They have a proper studio, and I've largely done this on a budget up until now. But that's why I want to start introducing other fixtures and features, and also because I do travel a lot. I want to do more traveling to places to do things in person. I think it adds a nice touch. But also, this is the problem: if you're a travel content creator, or you work mainly in travel stuff, then it works for you. But if you're someone who needs a stable internet connection to do a live stream or an update on things like this, then it's challenging. And some people can bullshit and not mention this, but I think it's important for you guys to know the challenges of trying to do this as well. Not that I'm making excuses; it's not the end of the world. But yeah, so apologies for the mixed quality stream, but I'll sort it out for hopefully in the next couple of hours. And appreciate all of you being with us. We have some interesting things coming up. We've got an interview tomorrow on Qatar. We have I posted a video a couple of weeks ago with a professor in person. The sound quality was terrible, and I know it was. I didn't hear it at first, so I've asked a couple of audio engineers to hard edit it. So I'm going to be posting a revamped version of that. Hopefully, there's 2 parts to that with Sergei Radchenko. Then we have a 2-part conversation with Martin Wolf of the FT. But I am working on some bigger picture things, which I'm quite excited about. I'm not going to reveal much more than that, but we're talking serious caliber types of guests. And if there's anyone specific that you want me to speak to or hear from, then let me know. But I am wanting to diversify the focuses of the channel as well. That's why some of you may have seen yesterday I uploaded a video with Dmitry Polyensky. He is the now new envoy for Russia to the OSCE, which is an organization called Organization of Security and Cooperation in Europe. And it was a challenging conversation. I know some of you don't like that, but I think it's important to speak to the other side. There are many great channels that I've collaborated with, from Jake Bro to Jonathan Fink to Ryan Macbeth to Jason J. Smart and Constantine on a monthly basis. But I want to speak to some dissenting channels as well. That's why I've had groups. I've interviewed people like Daniel Davis. I'm working on a couple of other channels, maybe the Duran. Some of you may know these channels because I think it's important to do so. And I love talking with James Colinzi and Michael Rossi, as you know, and we have a disagreement. Some people who watch James's channel think that I'm a little bit brash or abrasive, which is fair. I'm a bit hot-headed and less refined than James. But James and I have a great relationship and we get on very well. But we also disagree on some things. Or I found myself to be growing less and less in agreement with him on certain things, mainly around the idea that international law or the rule of law is still respected and that we can still operate under that presumption. Not because I don't agree with him in principle, but because instead of wanting to hold on to what we would prefer things to be as, we have to sort of just modernize and get with the times. So I think some people think when I say that, they think that I'm sort of pro X, Y, and Z, which I'm not. I am working. So I've been speaking to Svetlana Thisanayenko, I think that's her name, the Belarusian opposition leader, and her team for a while. I've been in touch with Viktor Orban's team. Anna Pobom, I have spoken to. I met her in person a couple of years ago. She's very tricky to get, and she's also knowledgeable of the fact how much in demand she is. That she plays on that fact. So Sergei Sobyanin, I am in touch with as well. So I'm going to be interviewing some occasional dissenting voices, but also just diversifying with many different ones. But yeah, with that, guys, I think I'm going to drop down to having a chat with you later. So if you want to, do be sure to join at 10. So in 2.5 hours, I will be back, hopefully with a much more stable internet, to talk with a friend of mine from Johns Hopkins. She's an expert on Yemen and specifically the Houthis. So we're probably going to have I'm doing more of these live podcasts. Also, that's the last thing I should say, that whilst the intensity of this war is happening, I'll be doing more podcasts in a live stream setting. And then, of course, you can see the recording afterwards. They're not as edited and refined as I like them to be, but I think given the rate at which things are changing, I'm just going to be trying to produce more content in that form for now, and keeping the pre-recorded videos as I did earlier, which was a sort of a condensed version of this hour and the quarter that I've been chatting about the Houthis. It was just a quick take. I'm going to be doing more quick takes, less editing, less scripted or whatever. Probably still as many editing mistakes, but yeah. So anyway, I'll see you all in a couple of hours, 2.5 hours. If you want to, I can link for it here if that helps for some of you. But yeah, it's going to be a good conversation. I think I'm quite excited to speak to Fatima. She's one of the more knowledgeable people that I know on the Houthis, and given the situation around them, I couldn't think of someone better. But yeah, let me just grab this link here. And yeah, if you want to sign up for that, it won't be too long. It definitely won't be an 1.5 hours like this one. But yeah, cheers, guys. I'll speak to you. See you soon. Thanks as always. And yeah, If you're new, like, subscribe, join the community. Take care, everyone.